Well, when John and I talked a little bit about what we were learning was the theme and some of the things that were going to be talked about and what we were supposed to talk about in terms of service and reaching out, it really brought to mind the life of Pier Giorgio Frassati, which I picked up a book about this summer and kind of on a whim read about his life and was very inspired by, and really brought a lot of those themes together for me in my mind. One of the things that was very evident in his life, he was a student, but also sometimes he wasn't. He had some issues in school. He failed in Latin, but he was also a student of great readings. Augustine, he loved Dante, he loved the writings of St. Paul, he loved to really pour his mind into Scripture. He was also a great adorer. He was part of about 15 different clubs in his lifetime. Now, he only lived to the age of 24 but 15 different clubs. Can you imagine? I mean, you thought we were busy. So some of those clubs was an all-night adoration club. There were a number of political clubs he was part of, things for school, and mountain climbing was a great love of his. And now, this was a time, he was born in 1901 in Turin, Italy. This was a time of a great wave of atheism throughout the country. So we think we have things hard, but this is pre-World War I. And also right around when he was a teenager, young man, was when fascism took rise. And it was very a violent time, to be a Catholic as a young, vibrant man was, that's what the old ladies do. You don't need to do that. And so he was not ashamed. He would wear his Catholic party pin. He would go to the adorations on the street. And he suffered. He suffered for that, and he was proud to do it. There was a poster he was putting up to advertise the all-night adoration, and he knew some hooligans were going to come by and try to take that down. He went over to defend it. And in the end, he ended up being a little roughed up, and the whole bulletin board got destroyed. But he was there. He was trying. He was fighting. And so, so often we think, oh, we're in such terrible times, but, the history of our church has shown us that we have many great examples of people who faced very, very difficult circumstances, and we're still a light. As I mentioned, he was a great athlete, just tremendous. He would hike in the last few days, through years of his life, he hiked about 39. He went on 39 mountain trips, and this was, in Italy, so not like Ohio mountains, but he just expressed the pure joy of being in the mountains. There's something about beauty. That's something as another element for us to help us to reach and get outward and get beyond ourselves to realize, look at this creation that God has made, and that was very evident in his life. But finally, he also, I'm using these glasses off and on because I'm old, but he also, from a very early age, had a very sensitive heart towards the poor. Just very naturally. There was a poor woman that came to their house when he was about 4 years old, and she expressed she needed help. She had a young son, and without any discussion, he took off his shoes and socks, and he handed the woman his own shoes. And that was evident all throughout his life. His parents would give him money for the train, and he would end up giving it away and then run home, be late for dinner. They'd get mad at him. Then his family just really did not get him at all. His folks were not very devout, and so they really could not figure him out. And so a lot of what he did for the poor, he joined, one of the clubs that he joined was the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and he would just gather food, medicines, clothing, different things like that, and he would kind of sneak out of the house and help provide and visit these people and help personally take care of many of the very, very poor in Turin, Italy. And so that was a major element of his life, and one of the reasons he was such an inspiration. Now, I'd like to share a little song with you.
The name of the song actually is To the Heights, which is from a photo of him climbing a mountaintop, and he wrote Versa l'alto on it, which is terrible. I just did terrible Italian there, but yeah, there we go. She did it better. But To the Heights.
To the Heights, yes. So much I need to pray. Augustine, Blessed Mary,
She's using the stand there because she wrote that 2 weeks ago in preparation for this talk here. So we are John and Carolyn Green. That's our Christmas picture there for the family. That is showing you that a 57-year-old overweight deacon has no right to be on an electric scooter. Just want to let you know that, in case you're wondering about that. Whoops. And full range of motion now after surgery. After surgery. So Daniel there is not too far from here. He's right next to Carolyn. He's actually in the Marine Corps. He's training out at Great Lakes right now. Claire is a dancer. She is our 14-year-old. She just got raised to professional level in her company. Kind of fun. I don't know if you have young kids or you know families with young kids. Please don't let their daughters be dancers because it will bankrupt you and them. So we go through about $1,000 a year just in pointe shoes. It's crazy. But Jonathan in the back there is a seminarian. He's heading into his junior year at Borromeo College Seminary. And then Peter there is going to do 5 to 10 with good behavior in some place, somewhere, sometime. But he's a hooligan. So I just want to tell you a little story. So recently, I don't know if you heard, but there was a couple angels that God sent down to check out how things were going on the planet. So they looked around, and then they went up and reported back to the Lord, and they said, "Well, Lord, you know, we're sorry to say it's bad. I mean, things are bad. Just faith is, people are struggling, the economy, the politics, it's just, there's probably only 5% of people on planet Earth that are really faithful and love you and adore you." And so the Lord thought, okay, what am I going to do to encourage them? So he said, you know what? I'm going to send them an email. I'm going to send them an email that is going to encourage their faith, that is going to strengthen them, that is going to get them through just life in a better way. Do you know what that email said? None of you got that email? Seriously, Father Bachansky, did you get that email? Oh, my goodness. What if that had happened? What if the Lord sent you something to encourage you in your faith right now? It's a good question to ask ourselves sometimes. What do we need? All the pastors are writing that down for their next homily. Did you notice that? I see them scribbling right now. It's like, okay, I got to do that one. So for me, one of the things that's really impacted my life is this verse from Micah. Micah 6:8. "Oh man, what is it that the Lord asks of you? Only this, to live justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God." This verse came to a head for me when I was working with Covenant House in New York City. I dropped out of college, went to work with homeless and runaway kids, and a man had actually committed suicide. He landed about 10, 20 feet from me. He was a homeless man in our neighborhood who had taken off all of his clothes, climbed to the top of the Port Authority, and just jumped. And it was horrifying. And I can still hear that slap of his body, hitting the ground. And that sent me into just a tailspin spiritually. It was a very dark time. I lived in a faith community. We prayed. And I just remember going into our chapel and just yelling at God, why is this happening? And, I'd been working for a couple years with all these beautiful street kids who had just come from horrible backgrounds and horrible things that had been done to them and things that they had done. And I was like, Lord, you got to do something about this, and it was silence, nothing. And then about 3 days after that, this verse came up in one of our evening prayers or morning prayers, and it just cut me to the quick. The writer of Hebrews says that the word of God is alive and active. It is sharper than any two-edged sword. It pierces the division of soul and spirit, both joints and marrow, and is able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. This passage just hit me to the quick, and I realized that, I had gone to New York City as a college dropout to help street kids because I knew, the problem was John Green wasn't there. If you get John Green there, streets are going to get cleaned up and it's going to be great. And the Lord was just saying to me, you're doing some right things for the wrong reasons. And these are my values. And so I've been asking these 3 questions since that time, and I still ask these 3 questions of Lord. First question is, what does it mean? How do I live justly in this life. So justice in Scripture is this idea of right relationship, living in right relationship with people around us, living in right relationship with our family, with creation, living in right relationship with God. That's justice in Scriptures. And Pier Giorgio did this in an amazing way. You know, he recognized that he had privilege. These are pictures of, that top picture there is Turin, Italy, around 1915. So he would have been about 15 years old and seeing this. But his father was an editor, actually the founder of La Stampa magazine. His father went on to become an ambassador in Germany, and he just had this life of privilege. But he realized that God gave him this gift to do something with. And so he would constantly go and look for ways to share his resources with the poor. He used to, he used to just, there was a time when a woman, I can't remember which stories you told, but there was a time when a woman came to the door and she had a young son that didn't have any shoes, and he immediately just took off his shoes and gave them to them. He also convinced Catholics that they needed to be engaged in politics. They needed to be engaged in what was going on in the midst of that world. And he had this incredible, joyful enthusiasm that just drew other people to him in amazing ways. For Carolyn and I, that question of how do I live justly is a question we wrestled with. You know, both of us come from a pretty nice, comfortable, upper middle class background. My dad was an executive in Goodyear. I grew up in this neighborhood called Silver Lake, which we actually live in now. And when I turned 16 and got confirmed, my dad asked what I wanted. And I said I'd like a sailboat. So I got a 16-foot Sidewinder sailboat to sail on our 100-acre lake. And I kind of thought, you guys got a sailboat, didn't you? What'd you get for confirmation? Okay, I got one sailboat over here. All right, good. All right. And I grew up in this comfortable existence where, I thought every kid got a sailboat when they got confirmed. It's just, it was crazy. But we realized as we got married and as we started doing our life together that God had given us certain resources, and he had also given us certain abilities. Carolyn's music ability. Which I always wrestle with, because sometimes I say things very poignant or funny, and I don't get applause for them. She writes a song and plays it, and she gets this long thing of applause. It's just not fair. Okay, sorry. I'm an ENFP on the Myers-Briggs, if you know anything about that. Oh, look, there's a bird. Yeah, we can get very distracted. So in 1990, as Father mentioned, I founded a ministry called Emmaus, started working with men involved in prostitution, and several times God had just kind of, through my time in New York City, through a time when I was a Catholic youth minister, taking kids down to Chicago, I'd run across these guys involved in prostitution. And, and I didn't even understand that men could be prostitutes when I first encountered this, but it just broke my heart to see these guys, getting to that point on the street where they were selling themselves in survival sex. And I was actually on a monastery visit. I was at the Abbey of the Genesee in Rochester, New York, and just really felt the Lord putting it in my path to help these men out. And so that led me on a 20-year journey of reaching out to these guys. And we would do an outreach program out on the streets at night and a daytime drop-in center. And then we had a residential home for a while. And when Carol and I first got married, we had we lived in an apartment for about a year, and then we rented the single-family home, and we started kind of one at a time, having different guys kind of move in and live with us. But it was also those entrepreneurial gifts that I had. So I was able to start up a ministry and get people to come together, and we grew it from about, I think we had an initial budget of about $700, and when we left it was about $1 million a year, and we had 2 cities that we were working in with 24 staff, and the mission's still going on right now today. But it was that idea of God had given us different abilities, different gifts, different skills. What were we going to do with that? Do we just sit with that for ourselves, or do we put it to work for his kingdom? You want to chime in anything there?
No, I like it.
Okay, you like it? Good. All right, just checking there. All right, so I want to ask you. I want to challenge you to think about this idea of justice. This idea of living in right relationship with the people around you, the things around you. This is a beautiful quote from Henry Newman. And I just encourage you to read through that while I wax eloquent here. I love that last line he says there. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do the work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it, if I do but keep the commandments and serve him in my calling. God has given you a work to do. He has given you a mission that no one else is going to be able to do. You know, Father mentioned I work now with a group called the Evangelical Catholic, and I'm a mission advancement officer. And what I love about the Evangelical Catholic is they've created this wonderful dynamic process called Reach More that just helps your average Catholic become a disciple maker, to be able to share their faith, to be able to nurture people in discipleship. And the laity of the Catholic Church are a sleeping giant waiting to awaken. When the laity realize that, you know, the Lord is calling them into mission, it's not just the priests, it's not just our good sisters that are here. You know, when the laity realize that the Lord gave us, every single one of us, a command to go into all the world and make disciples. He didn't say go into all the world and work for justice. He didn't say go into all the world and be pro-life. He didn't say go into all the world and have potlucks and fish fries, you know? But he wants us to do all those things, okay? He still wants us to do the fish fries and the justice and the pro-life. But he said go into all the world and make disciples. Each and every one of us are called to be a disciple maker. And I think it starts with this question: how do I live justly with the gifts, the abilities, the talents, the motivation that God has given me? How am I putting that to God's service? Next question: to whom am I called to show mercy? For Pier Giorgio, I'm going to call him Pier Giorgio. Is that okay? You like that? Okay, good. It's kind of like I got a bad angel over here that wants to be distracted. Then I got this good angel over here that says, okay, stay on focus. So, you know, Pier Giorgio has exuded this love for the poor in his life. And one of the beautiful things was when he died. So Pier Giorgio was out on a kayaking trip. And he started saying, you know what, my back's not feeling good, my legs aren't feeling good. So he went home. As he goes home, his grandmother dies. And everybody is up, you know, just struggling with this. And his mother and father see that he's not feeling terribly well. And they think, well, he's got a flu, just kind of go upstairs. And he knew that he was getting sick. And he knew, he had polio. They didn't know it at the time, and this is before the vaccine. And so, and polio just ravaged him very quickly. And he probably contracted it from some of the poor that he was visiting. But he didn't want anybody to take their attention off of grandma. And so he just very quietly kind of suffered. And eventually he died just a few days after his grandmother passed away. The family decided to have a funeral, and they thought we're going to have some of our business friends and some people from the embassy over. And when they had this funeral, this bottom picture is a picture of his funeral. Thousands of poor from Turin just flowed out to walk with his coffin. Thousands of people who his parents had no idea that this young man was influencing and ministering to. It was just a beautiful, beautiful funeral. For us, this idea of showing mercy has come from a focus on blue screens. I love blue screens. Okay. So the foul demons of technology are not going to cooperate right now. Okay, there you go. Hello. All right. So I've always been very big on just following a calling. I founded Emmaus Ministries when I was 26 years old, when I was very young, and had a wonderful group of people around me that helped to grow the mission. But our calling was to work with these men involved in prostitution. We also worked with college students. We had students from Wheaton College. So I went to Wheaton College, which is in the southwest or west suburbs of Chicago. I was one of 12 Catholics out of 3,000 evangelicals. Billy Graham is the big alumnus there. And, my mom's greatest fear is I was going to leave the church and marry a Baptist. And only one of those happened. She was Baptist at the time. So her father is a Baptist pastor, so he did not think he would send his little gal to Wheaton.
Expecting that outcome from
No,
Germany to Wheaton.
and hasn't gone well either, but we're working on it. But that idea of calling, and then in 2007, I remember we went home for Christmas, and I realized my dad was really sick and really struggling, and so was my mom. And eventually, we moved to Ohio temporarily for a year in 2009. That when we're still living in Ohio. So it was one of those surprise things. And Carolyn really thought I did a bait and switch because she was happy doing ministry in Chicago, but. We moved back to Ohio. My dad passed away about 3 months after we got there. I was able to just walk with him and just journey with him and clean him up after he went to the bathroom, help him get his clothes on. And never once in my life, and even never once in those 3 months, did I ever hear my dad say, "I love you." So I make sure that my kids hear that from me every single day. But it was a blessing to be with him. And then we realized Mom was going south, and she eventually went into Alzheimer's. And so we spent about 4 years just as her caregiver. And now we care for an 89-year-old aunt, my mom's sister, who lives with us, Aunt Martha. And, the Lord has changed kind of our focus of life and our focus of ministry, from working with these guys on the streets to, our aging parents. And eventually we started a business called Cafe Au Play. And now we're kind of getting back into full-time ministry. But I think there's that question, at different stages in our lives, God calls us to different charisms, different apostolates, different movements. And I thought I would spend my whole life doing urban ministry. I absolutely loved it. I loved the guys. I loved the excitement of being in the city. I did not like the traffic. So that was one nice thing about Ohio. And I really didn't want to move back home. It's a comfortable, it's a wealthy neighborhood, but it was just that calling to go and be with our parents when we did. And so it was beautiful. So I guess I ask you that question. What is God calling? To whom are you called to show mercy to? There is a sanctity in just ordinary life, in doing life, in being with our families, and interacting with, your neighbors, interacting with people in your church. But God is active and present in that. And He is bringing people into your life who need mercy, who need love, who need your grace, who need you to be Christ's hands and Christ's feet. So who are those people in your life? Last question. How do I walk humbly with God? For Pier Giorgio, one of the beautiful things was his just love for Eucharistic adoration. They had a servant in their house. They probably had several, but this one servant, he would go to bed with a string tied to his finger. And he had worked out a deal with her that when she came in early in the morning to start breakfast at 4 o'clock or so, she would yank on the string so that he could wake up, get dressed, and go to Mass and go for adoration without his family knowing it at all. He also just read and he studied, as Carolyn mentioned, St. Paul and Augustine, just steeped himself. There was never a wasted moment in his life of study, of prayer, of devotion to the poor. And whether it was politicking or hiking, he knew he was giving it all to God. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, beautiful way of walking humbly with God. For us, I mentioned Trappist retreats. I've always loved going on Trappist silent retreats. Also, both my wife and I, and actually more Carolyn, I would say, have developed just a wonderful love for the Blessed Virgin. And this is one of my favorite pictures of the Madonna and Child. And I love this because Mary is just ripped in this picture, And, man, she's got some serious guns there. It's like, I don't have muscles. And I love that image of just Mary being this strong, beautiful woman. And because, I think for one, back then they probably were. But I also love that little picture of Jesus and his chubby thighs, the only time in his life that chubby thighs are cute. So enjoy it while you can, kid. So praying the rosary, but also in all of our lives, for both Carolyn and I, spiritual disciplines of varying types, varying kinds have come into our lives. And again, they come into your life in seasons. Spiritual direction has been a wonderful practice that I've engaged in and been really blessed by, but also silence and solitude. I remember for much of my time in urban ministry, every 6 months, I'd do a 5-day silent retreat. I had to go and just get quiet and still before the Lord. And I remember this one time meeting with my spiritual director. I actually, when I was praying for a new spiritual director, as Catherine mentioned, just, praying for a spiritual director is a good thing to do. So I was very specific to the Lord. I said, I want a spiritual director who was a former priest, a priest who was a former missionary in Japan and had one of those little stone gardens in back of his rectory that had like the little kind of little trees. What do they call those little stub?
Bonsai.
There you go. I wanted a bonsai tree. So I was very specific in that prayer. I said, Lord, that's what I want. And he led me to Martha Bartholomew. He was a retired farmer, and she and her husband David had taken 33 acres and transformed it into a spiritual retreat. They took a garage, they busted out the windows on the back of it and built this beautiful windowed look. And I would just sit there watching the stream go by and herds of deer come by, and I would meet with Martha, and I thought, okay, Lord, you got pretty close, to what I was asking for. Not quite, but good luck next time. That's okay. But the Lord came in really well. And I remember one time talking with Martha, I was meeting with her, and one of the things in doing urban ministry, it's very dark. Some of the places that we went to, and we would go into bars and clubs where guys were hustling, and it was just very dark. And I remember I just wrestled one time, just had this dream that was just horrible and depressing, and I was sharing it with her in spiritual direction, and her simple response was, John, you walk through the barnyard of the world, you're going to get a lot of crap on your feet. And she didn't say crap. I just want to let you know that. But and I loved that, just that simple farmer knowledge. It's like, yeah, and so I realized I was not doing the things I needed to keep myself spiritually just refreshed and revitalized and pure. And so spiritual disciplines of all sorts of different types and shapes are an incredible gift for us to walk humbly with God. And again, spiritual disciplines change and grow throughout our station in life. And so I found this really nice little spreadsheet that hopefully you can read. Please ignore the bad formatting there. But this is a great list. Just look over this list of different spiritual direction or spiritual disciplines, and think about ways that perhaps you can engage in something to grow deeper with the Lord. The Lord is, God created 52 species of parrots. He is an incredibly creative Lord and Father. And you look at even like what's coming from the Webb, telescope. It's just amazing, God's creativity. And there are so many different ways to engage in our relationship with the Lord, of walking humbly with Him, whether it's Lectio Divina or Lectio Visio, where you're meditating upon works of art, whether it's those silence and solitude. But be open. Find a spiritual direction practice that deepens your walk, a spiritual discipline that deepens your walk with the Lord, and commit to it and grow into it. So those 3 questions. How do I live justly? To whom am I called to love mercy? And how do I walk humbly with God? I continue to ask those 3 questions. And God has taken me on just an enormous blessing of a spiritual journey in asking those questions. So I encourage you in your prayer this day, as we close, and maybe at Mass tomorrow, start asking those questions. What is God asking you to do? The people of Israel wanted to buy God off. Right before, early in chapter 6 of Micah, they're saying, what does the Lord want? Does He want 1,000 rams? Does He want 1,000 gallons of oil to sacrifice to Him? He said, no, oh man, what the Lord asks of you is only this: live justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. A couple things before we close. One thing. I have a book called Street Walking with Jesus. It's downstairs. and Carolyn has several of her CDs. She's done 4 different recordings, and unfortunately, the song that she played is not available because she wrote it 2 weeks ago. So, but we love Courage. We've been supporters of Courage. I was helpful in getting the Courage chapter in Chicago started. Actually had Father Harvey up at our parish, and man, what a little spitfire Father Harvey was, for those of you who knew him. And I was blessed to speak at a couple of these conferences very early on in Courage. So, but we would love to offer our books and Carolyn's music just for a donation of any type downstairs. So I know sometimes these conferences, people really come sacrificially in coming to these. So please take a book. There's music at the end of every chapter. That's Carolyn's music. The websites are no longer active, but all of her music is available streaming on any of the streaming services like Apple and Amazon and those things. So to close, I'm going to ask Carolyn to sing her song one more time. And I'm going to ask you to sing, if you would like, on the choruses. Those are the kind of the bold words. And I want to close with one more story. One of the things that Carolyn and I, in this kind of spiritual reading, William Lloyd Garrison was a abolitionist back in the early 1920s and 30s in our country. And at one point, and this is a time in America when, everybody thought slavery was a bad idea, but they kind of thought like, let's just let the courts deal with it. Let's let it's going to be legislated out and stuff. And of course, eventually we had a civil war. And William Lloyd Garrison, as a person of faith, had said, I can't do that. And so he agitated. He wrote pamphlets. He wrote newsletters. He stood outside of these, white-only churches and just railed against the evils of slavery. And at one point, a friend of his came up to him and said, Garrison, you're irritating people. You're making people uncomfortable. Why are you doing this? Why are you so on fire? And William Lloyd Garrison's response was, I am so on fire because there are mountains of ice about me to melt. I am so on fire because there are mountains of ice about me to melt. And we can look with the gift of hindsight and say, yeah, that was an obvious mountain. But what are our mountains? What are those things in our lives, in our society? What people are trying to do with our beautiful gift of sexuality and is a huge mountain of ice. And your testimony is on fire, burning those mountains of ice. Your witness. Father Harvey, he was a huge little fireball burning mountains of ice, wasn't he? That's what we need. We need people to come and be encouraged and be blessed in a place like this, but to go forth as mountains of ice and just melt the evil that is in our world. And we can do it by God's grace and God's blessing. So please join us as Carolyn sings a song one more time. And I'm going to stop talking now. Okay, hang on.
There's so much I need to pray. Augustine, Blessed Mary, Saint Paul, teach me faith. Come renew
My mind, Lord, I need you. Perilous at times, but I trust you. Lead me through a life that is reaching to the heights. In the shallow world, I'll grow deeper. Sending in you, I'll go further. Give me iron will to press on into the heights.
mountain high, rugged cliffside, one hand higher than the last. To the heights, verso alto, pure joy in this heavenly task. Come renew my mind, Lord, I
Need perilous the times, but I trust you. Through a life that is reached to the heights. In the shallow world, I'll grow deeper. Centered in on you, I'll go further. The iron will to press on into the heights.
See your face. Help me serve just one more. Parcels wrapped, medicines bought, slipping out so no one sees. Sitting still inside suffering. Will love give them some relief? Let me
Be a sign, Lord, they need you. Here is all my time, Lord, I trust. Help me see the lights that shine brightness in the lights. Totally consumed, I'll burn brighter. Still adoring you, I'll stay longer. I will have no fear, you will take me to the heights. Renew my mind, Lord, I need you. Perilous the times, but I trust you. Lead me to a life that is reaching to the heights. In the shallow world, I'll grow deeper. Centered in on you, I'll go further. Give me iron will to press on into the heights. To the heights. Thank you, everybody.